ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaskar, my dear friends. This is fifth video on the teachings of Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi. The last video, the last paragraph was incidentally the devotee who raised this question stayed on and became one of the staunchest and most devoted of all. Complete faith in the Guru was necessary, but as explained in the previous chapter, effort was also necessary. So I start the video number 5 with the devotee asking a question. After leaving this ashramam in October, I was aware of Bhagwan's peace enfolding me for about 10 days all the time. While busy with work, there was an undercurrent of that peace of unity. It was almost like the dual consciousness while half asleep in a dull lecture. Then it faded out entirely and the old stupidities came instead. Work leaves no time for separate meditation. Is the constant reminder I am and trying to feel this while actually at work enough? Bhagwan. It will become constant when the mind is strengthened. Repeated practice strengthens the mind and such a mind is capable of holding on to the current. Then whether you are engaged in work or not, the current remains unaffected and uninterrupted. It often happens that the disciples are no improvement in himself despite the effort, but he was told to have faith in the Guru. The process might not be visible to himself and improvement might be the greatest when least apparent. He evoked no spectacular changes in the devotee, for such changes may be a superstructure without foundation and collapse later. Indeed, it sometimes happened that a devotee would grow despondent, seeing no improvement at all in himself, and would complain that he was not progressing at all. In such cases, Bhagwan might offer consolation or might retort, "How do you know there is no progress?" And he would explain that it is the Guru, not the disciple, who sees the progress made. It is for the disciple to carry on perseveringly with his work, even though the structure being raised may be out of sight of mind. There were some who desired a definite statement that Bhagwan was a Guru, but this he would not make. Mr. Evans Vance, the well-known writer on Tibetan Yoga, asked whether Bhagwan initiated disciples, but Bhagwan sat silent, giving no reply. Then one of the devotees took it on himself to answer that the Maharshi does not regard any as being outside himself and therefore none can be disciples to him. His grace is all-pervading and is bestowed in silence on any deserving individual. Bhagwan heard the explanation and did not reject it. Sometimes he would explain that the Guru-disciple relationship was necessary from the point of view of the disciple, since the latter viewed things from the standpoint of duality, and therefore the disciple could affirm that so and so was his Guru, although the Guru would not affirm that the other was his disciple. Devotee, Bhagwan says he has no disciples. Bhagwan, Yes, devotee. He also says that a guru is necessary if one wishes to attain liberation. Bhagwan, yes, what then must I do? Has my sitting here all these years been just a waste of time? Must I go and look for some guru in order to receive initiation, saying that Bhagwan says he is not a guru? Bhagwan, what do you think brought you here such a long distance and made you remain here so long? Why do you doubt? If there had been any need to seek a guru elsewhere, you would have gone away long ago. The Guru or Jnani, enlightened one, sees no difference between himself and the others. For him, all are Jnani, all are one with himself. So, how can a Jnani say that such and such is his disciple? But the unliberated one sees all as multiple, he sees all as different from himself. So to him the guru-disciple relationship is reality. For him there are three ways of initiation, by touch, look and silence. Sri Bhagwan here gave the disciple to understand that his way was by silence, as he has to many on other occasions. Devotee. Then Bhagwan does have disciples. Bhagwan, as I said, from Bhagwan's point of view, there are no disciples, but from that of the disciple, the grace of the Guru is like an ocean. If he comes with a cup, he will get only a cupful. It is no use complaining of the niggardliness of the ocean. The bigger the vessel, the more he will be able to carry. It is entirely up to him. When the devotee pressed him once more for a confirmation, he turned to the attendant and said humorously, "Let him get a document from the sub-registrar and take it to the office and get the office stamp on it." In the following conversation, he implied clearly enough that he was to be regarded as the visible Guru. Devotee, can Sri Bhagwan help us to realize the truth? Bhagwan, help is always there. Devotee, then there is no need to ask questions. I do not feel the ever present help. Bhagwan, surrender and you will find it. Devotee, I am always at your feet. Will Bhagwan give me some Upadesa to follow? Otherwise, how can I get the help? Living 600 miles away. Bhagwan, the Sadguru is within. Devotee, the Sadguru is necessary to guide me to understand that fact. Bhagwan, the Sadguru is within you. Devotee, I want a visible Guru. Bhagwan, that visible Guru says that he is within. It was in keeping with the purely spiritual nature of Bhagwan's initiation and guidance that he was averse to touching his disciple or being touched by them. In the further part of the talk just quoted, the devotee requests, "Devotee, will the Sadguru place his hand on my head to assure me of his help? Then I shall have to consolation of knowing that his promise will be fulfilled." In such cases, Bhagwan was apt either to remain silent or to turn into a joke. On this occasion, he took the later course. Bhagwan, next you will be asking me for a bond and filing a suit if you imagine that the help is not forthcoming. It may be said by some readers of this book that this doctrine of God manifested as Guru was all right for those who had the good fortune to meet Bhagwan in his lifetime. But what of those who seek a Guru now? There are Gurus to be found, although the appearance on earth of a perfect Sadguru, such as Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi, A Jivan Mukta living in constant conscious identity with the self is a very rare thing. Devotee, how can one know whether a particular person is competent to be a guru? Bhagwan, by the peace of mind you feel in his presence and by the respect you feel for him. Devotee, and if it turns out that he is not competent, what will be the fate of the disciple who has implicit faith in him? Bhagwan, the fate of each one will be according to his merit. But if the Guru has not attained the supreme state, can he be regarded as a manifestation of God or the self? In a way, he can. The disciple himself is the self, although ignorant of his true identity. The entire outer world manifests tendencies and possibilities in himself, and among these, the person who functions as guru for him manifests the possibility of divine guidance even without full awareness. There is, however, another possibility also, and that is continued guidance by Bhagwan. It will be recalled that Bhagwan confirmed that the Guru need not necessarily take human form. He sometimes added that this happened only in rare cases. He himself had no guru. He himself had no human guru. Just as with self-inquiry he created a new path suitable to the conditions of the modern world, a path that can be followed without any outward forms invisibly while conforming to the conforming to the outer conditions of modern life. So also he brought to man the possibility of silent, formless initiation requiring no physical guru. In his lifetime, initiation was by look or silence. He often confirmed that the truest upadesa or spiritual instruction was by silence. The highest form of grace is silence. It is also the highest spiritual instruction. All other modes of instruction are derived from silence and are therefore secondary. Silence is the primary form. If the Guru is silent and the seeker's mind gets purified by itself, the disciples of Bhagwan have found that the silent instruction continues as therefore. Others who have never met him in his lifetime have been drawn to him and began to follow the guidance. If this seems strange to anyone, it means that he has not understood what Bhagwan was in his lifetime, that he identifies the Guru with the body. It is sometimes asked how a Jivan Mukta continues to guide disciples after death, when he has merged in the Absolute, the Self of all. But the Jivan Mukta is already consciously one with the Absolute, the Self of all, while still embodied. If this is not incompatible with initiation and guidance, while he wears a body, it is not afterwards. Death makes no difference to him, no change in his state. There is nothing more to be acquired because he is that now. There is nothing to be lost because he has already completely surrendered the ego. P. Banerjee asked Bhagwan, what is the difference between Jivan Mukti, realization while in the body, and Videha Mukti, realization after death? Bhagwan, there is no difference. For those who ask, it is said, a jnani with a body is a Jivan Mukta, and he attains Videha Mukti when he sheds the body. But this difference exists only for the onlookers, not for the jnani. His state is the same before and after the body is dropped. We think of the jnani as a human form, as or as being in that form, but he knows that he is the self, the one reality which is both inside and out, and which is not bounded by any form or shape. There is a verse in the Bhagavata. Here Bhagwan quoted the verse in Tamil, which says, just as a man who is drunk is not conscious whether his upper cloth is on his body or has slipped away from it, the Jnani is hardly conscious of his body, and it makes no difference to him whether the body remains or has dropped off. He did not encourage curiosity and seldom answered questions about the state of the Jnani or the realized man. But when asked whether the Jnani continues to perform a function after the death of the body, I have heard him reply briefly that in some cases he may. Also, he himself confirmed what his disciples know now from experience, that the Guru may continue to give guidance after the death of the body when no longer in human form. Dr. Masalawala, a retired Chief Medical Officer of Bhopal, who has been here for over a month and is in temporary charge of the Ashramam hospital in the absence of Dr. K. Shivarao, put the following questions to Bhagwan and received the following answers. Devotee, Bhagwan says the influence of the Jnani steals into the devotee in silence. Bhagwan also says contact with great man, exalted souls is one efficacious means of realizing one's true being. Bhagwan, yes, what is the contradiction? Jnani, great man, exalted souls, does he differentiate between them? Thereupon I said no. Bhagwan, contact with them is good. They will work through silence. By speaking, their power is reduced. Speech is always less powerful than silence, so silent contact is the best. Devotee, does the contact continue even after the dissolution of the physical body of the Jnani, or only so long as he is in flesh and blood? Bhagwan, the Guru is not in the physical form, so contact will remain even after his physical form vanishes. He declared that one who has obtained the grace of Guru would never be abandoned. He who has earned the grace of the Guru will undoubtedly be saved and never forsaken, just as the prey that has fallen into the tiger's jaw will never be allowed to escape. Remembering this, perhaps some devotees complained when the death of his body was imminent that he was abandoning them, and asked what they could do without his continued guidance. He answered briefly. The implication was clear. The Guru is the same whether he wears a body or not, and his devotees have since found it to be so. Having dealt with the need to pass from theory to practice, the possibility of practicing in the conditions of the modern world without any outward observances, and the necessity for a Guru, the next two chapters will deal with the forms of practice that Bhagwan prescribed. His prescribing them openly is in itself remarkable. In other public writings and utterances, the spiritual masters of all religions have dealt mainly with theory and said little or nothing about the practical discipline they enjoined. The reason for this is obvious. It is that, as Bhagwan explains in the story of the king and his minister quoted earlier in this chapter, a technique of spiritual training can be legitimately used and be effective for good only when the use of it has been authorized by one duly qualified, and yet Bhagwan himself openly expounded the method he enjoined, both in speech and writing. Most of the books on which the present exposition is based were written and published during his lifetime, and he always showed interest in them and often recommended a questioner to turn to one of them for his answer. Even when it became clear that the life of his body was approaching its end, he continued to show interest in their editing and publication. Why did he permit this when he was insistent that no technique is valid without the authorization of the Guru? The only answer is the one given above. Physical death made no difference. If the Mukta can be a Guru before death, so can he also after death. He becomes no more a Mukta by dying. The path that has been made open by His grace to those who turn to Him was not for His lifetime only or for those few only who could approach Him physically. He said, "They say that I am dying, but I am not going away. Where could I go? I am here." Now starts the most important part of his teaching, chapter number 5, self-inquiry. That is the most important. Although refraining for the reason given in the previous chapter from describing himself as a guru, Sri Bhagwan did in fact constantly act as such. When any visitor came with his questions, he would turn the trend of them from theory to practice, and in explaining and enjoining methods of spiritual training, he was as forthcoming as he was reluctant to expound mere theory. He often said that the true teaching was in silence, but this did not mean that the verbal expositions also were not given. They indicated to the seeker in what way he should make an effort, while the silent influence on his heart helped him to do so. As will be shown in the next chapter, Sri Bhagwan authorized many different methods. However, he said the greatest emphasis on self-inquiry and constantly recommended it, and therefore his method will be dealt with first. It is now a new method. It is not a new method. Indeed, being the most direct method of all, it must be the most ancient. However, in ancient times, it had been a path reserved for the heroic few who could strive in solitude, withdrawn from the world in constant meditation. In recent times, as might be expected, it had become increasingly rare. What Bhagwan did was to restore it in a new form combined with karma marga, the path of action, in such a way that it could be used in the conditions of the modern world. Since it requires no ritual or outer form, it is in fact the ideal method for the needs of our times. And yet it is not weakened or diluted by being adapted to the modern conditions of life, but remains central and direct. For the subsidence of the mind, there is no other means more effective than the self-inquiry. Even though the mind subsides by other means, that is only apparently so. It will rise again. This is the direct method. All other methods are practiced while retaining the ego, and therefore many doubts arise, and the ultimate question still remains to be tackled in the end. But in this method, the final question is the only one and is raised from the very beginning. Self-inquiry leads directly to self-realization by removing the obstacles which make you think that the self is not already realized. Meditation requires an object to meditate on, whereas in the self-inquiry there is only the subject and no object. That is the difference between them. Devotee, why should self-inquiry alone be considered the direct method to realization? Bhagwan, because every kind of path except self-inquiry presupposes the retention of the mind as the instrument for following it and cannot be followed without the mind. The ego may take different and more subtle forms at different stages of one's practice, but it is never destroyed. The attempt to destroy the ego or the mind by methods other than self-inquiry is like a thief turning policeman to catch the thief, that is himself. Self-inquiry alone can reveal the truth that neither the ego nor the mind really exist and enable one to realize the pure undifferentiated being of the self or the absolute. This statement that the mind is not used by the method of self-inquiry was not always understood, and therefore Bhagwan, when asked, explained that it means that the mind is not taken for granted as a real entity, but its very existence is questioned, and that this is the easiest way to dispel the illusion of its existence. Bhagwan. To ask the mind to kill the mind is like making the thief the policeman. He will go with you and pretend to catch the thief, but nothing will be gained. So you must turn inward and see where the mind rises from, and then it will cease to exist. In reference to this answer, Sir Thambi Thorai of Jaffna, who has been living as a sadhu in Palakothu for over a year, asked me whether asking the mind to turn inward and seek its source is not also employing the mind. I put this doubt before Bhagwan. Bhagwan, of course, we are employing the mind. It is well known and admitted that only with the help of the mind can the mind be killed. But instead of setting about saying there is a mind and I want to kill it, you begin to seek its source, and then you find it does not exist at all. The mind turned outward results in thoughts, and objects turned inwards, it becomes itself the self. It can be said that the mind ceases to exist, or that it becomes transformed into the self. The meaning is really the same. It does not mean that a person becomes mindless like a stone, but that the pure consciousness of the self is no longer confined within the narrow limits of an individualized mind, and that he no longer sees through a glass darkly, but with clarity and radiant vision. By steady and continuous investigation into the nature of the mind is transformed into that to which I refers, and that is in fact the self. The mind has necessarily to depend for its existence on something gross. It never subsists by itself. It is the mind that is otherwise called the subtle body, ego, jiva or soul. That which arises in the physical body as I is the mind. If one inquires whence the I thought arises in the body in the first instance, it will be found that it is from the hridayam or the heart. That is the source and stay of the mind. Or again, if one merely continuously repeats to oneself inwardly, I, with the entire mind fixed thereon, that also leads to the same source. The first and foremost of all thoughts that arise in the mind is the primal I thought. It is only after the rise or origin of the I thought that innumerable other thoughts arise. In other words, only after the first personal pronoun I has arisen do the second and third person pronouns you, he, etc. occur to the mind, and they cannot subsist without it, since every other thought can occur only after the rise of the I thought, and since the mind is nothing but a bundle of thoughts, it is only through the inquiry, who am I, that the mind subsides. Moreover, the integral I thought, implicit in such inquiry, having destroyed all other thoughts, itself finally gets destroyed or consumed, just as a stick used for stirring the burning funeral pyre gets consumed. It must already be apparent from these indications that self-inquiry, as taught by Bhagwan, is something very different from the introversion of the psychologist. In fact, it is not really a mental process at all. Introversion means studying the composition and contents of the mind, whereas this is an attempt to probe behind the mind to the self from which it arises. When the mind or ego has to be discarded in any case, why waste time and analyzing it? To inquire who am I that I am in bondage and thus know one's real nature is the only liberation. To keep the mind constantly turned inwards and to avoid the sin the self is the only self-enquiry. Just as it is futile to examine the rubbish that has to be swept up only to be thrown away, so it is futile for him who seeks to know the self to set to work enumerating the tattvas that develop the self and examining them instead of casting them away. He should consider the phenomenal world with reference to himself as merely a dream. Similarly, self-inquiry differs fundamentally from psychoanalysis or any other kind of psychiatric treatment. Such a treatment can only aim at producing a normal, healthy, integrated human being, but not a transcending the bounds of the individual human state, since those who conduct it have themselves not done this and cannot open a road they have not trod. One thing, however, that self inquiry in its initial stages has in common with psychiatric treatment is that it serves to bring up hidden thoughts and impurities from the depths of mind. Devotee, other thoughts arise more forcibly when one attempts meditation. Bhagwan. Yes, all kinds of thoughts arise in meditation. That is only right, for what lies hidden in you is brought out. Unless it rises up, how can it be destroyed? Thoughts rise up spontaneously, but only to be extinguished in due course, thus strengthening the mind. Devotee, when I concentrate, all sorts of thought arise and disturb me. The more I try, the more thoughts rise up. What should I do, Bhagwan? Yes, that will happen. All that is inside will try to come out. There is no other way except to pull the mind up each time it wants to go astray and fix it in the self. Devotee, Bhagwan, has often said that one must reject other thoughts when one begins the quest. But thoughts are endless. If one thought is rejected, another comes up, and there seems to be no end at all. Bhagwan, I do not say that you must keep on rejecting thoughts. If you cling to yourself, to the I thought, and your interest keeps you to that single thought, other thoughts will get rejected and will automatically vanish. Just as self inquiry is not introspection as understood by the psychologist, so also it is not argument or speculation as understood by the philosophers. Devotee, when I think, who am I? The answer comes, I am not this mortal body but am consciousness or the self. And then another thought suddenly arises, why has the self become manifest? In other words, why has God created the world? Bhagwan, the inquiry, who am I, really means trying to find the source of the ego or of the I thought. You are not to occupy the mind with other thoughts, such as I am not the body. Seeking the source of the I serves as a means of getting rid of all other thoughts. You should not allow any scope for other thoughts, such as you mentioned, but should keep the attention fixed on finding the source of the I, though by asking when any other thoughts arises, to whom it occurs, and if the answer is to me, you then resume the thought, what is this I and what is its source? Bhagwan did sometimes allow or even use mental argument, but that was to convince the beginner of the unreality of the individual self or ego, thus induce him to take up self-inquiry. The argument itself was not self-inquiry. Devotee, who am I? How is the answer to be found? Bhagwan, ask yourself the question. The body, Annamaya kosha, and its functions are not I. Going deeper, the mind, Manomaya kosha, and its functions are not I. The next step takes one to the question, where from do these thoughts arise? The thoughts may be spontaneous, superficial, or analytical. They operate in the mind. Then who is aware of them? The existence of thoughts, their clear conception and operation become evident to the individual. This analysis leads to the conclusion that the individuality is operative as the cognizer of the existence of thoughts and their sequence. This individuality is the ego, or as people say, Vijnanmaya Kosha. Intellect is only the sheath of the I and not the I itself. Enquiring further, the questions arise, what is this I? Where from does it come? I was not aware in sleep. Simultaneously with its rise, sleep changes to dream and wakefulness, but I am not concerned with the dream state just now. Who am I now in the wakeful state? If I originated on waking from sleep, then the I was covered up with ignorance. Such an ignorant I cannot be what the scriptures refer to, or the wise affirm, I am beyond even sleep. I must be here and now, and must be what I was all along in sleep and dream also. Unaffected by the qualities of these states, I must therefore be the unqualified substratum underlying these three states after Anandamaya Kosa is transcended. Two Parsi ladies arrived from Ahmedabad and spoke with Bhagwan. Lady, Bhagwan, we have been spiritually inclined from childhood. We have read several books on philosophy and are attracted by Vedanta. So we read the Upanishads, Yoga Vasishta, Bhagavad Gita. We try to meditate, but there is no progress in our meditation. We do not understand how to realize. Can you kindly help us towards the realization? Bhagwan, how do you meditate? Ladies, I begin by asking myself, who am I? And eliminate the body as not I, the breath as not I, the mind as not I. But then I am unable to proceed further. Bhagwan, well, that is alright so far as the mind goes. Your process is only mental. Actually, all the scriptures mention this process only in order to guide the seeker to the truth. The truth cannot be directly indicated. That is why this mental process is used. You see, he who eliminates all the not I cannot eliminate the I. In order to be able to say I am not this or I am that, there must be the I to say it. This I is only the ego or the I thought. After the rising up of this I thought, all other thoughts arise. The I thought is therefore the root thought. If the root is pulled out, all the rest is uprooted at the same time. Therefore, seek the root I. Question yourself, who am I? Find out the source of the I. Then all these problems will vanish and the pure self alone will remain. Lady, but how am I to do it, Bhagwan? The I is always there, whether in deep sleep, in dream, or in the waking state. The one who sleeps is the same as the one who is now speaking. There is always the feeling of I. If it were not so, you would have to deny your existence. But you do not. You say, I am. Find out who is. Lady, I still do not understand. You say the I is now the false I. How am I to eliminate this wrong I, Bhagwan? You need not eliminate any false I. How can I eliminate itself? All that you need to do is to find out its origin and stay there. Your effort can extend only so far. Then the beyond will take care of itself. You are the helpless there. No effort can reach it. Lady, if I am always here and now, why do I do not feel so? Bhagwan, who says that you do not? Does the real I or the false I? Ask yourself, and you will find that it is the false I. The false I is the obstruction which has to be removed in order that the true I may cease to be hidden. The feeling I have not realized is the obstruction to realization. In fact, it is already realized. There is nothing more to be realized. If there were, realization would be something new, which did not yet exist but was to come about in the future. But whatever is born will also die. If realization is not eternal, it is not worth having. Therefore, what we seek is not something that must begin to exist, but only that which is eternal but is veiled from us by obstruction. All that we need do is to remove the obstruction. What is eternal is not recognized as such owing to ignorance. Ignorance is the obstruction, get rid of it, and all will be well. This ignorance is identical with the I thought. Find its source and it will vanish. The I thought is like a spirit which, although not palpable, rises up simultaneously with the body, flourishes with it, and disappears with it. The body consciousness is the wrong I. Give it up. You can do so by seeking the source of I. The body does not say I am. It is you who say I am the body. Find out who this I is. Seek its source and it will vanish. Lady, then will there be bliss? Bhagwan, bliss is co-equal with being consciousness. All the arguments relating to the eternal being apply to eternal bliss also. Your nature is bliss. Ignorance is now hiding the bliss. But you have only to remove the ignorance for the bliss to be freed. Ladies, should we not find out the ultimate reality of the world as individual and God? Bhagwan, these are conceptions of the I. They arise only after the advent of the I thought. Did you think of them in deep sleep? Yet you existed in deep sleep, and the same you is speaking now. If they were real, would they not exist in your sleep also? They are dependent on the I thought. Again, does the world tell you I am the world? Does the body say I am the body? You say this is the world, this is the body, and so on. So these are only your conceptions. Find out who you are, and that you will be the end of all doubt. Lady, what becomes of the body after realization? Does it continue to exist or not? We see realized people performing actions like other people. Bhagwan. This question need not worry you now. You can ask it after realization if you feel like it. As for realization being, let them take care of themselves. Why do you worry about them? In fact, after realization, neither the body nor anything else will appear different from the self. Lady, if we are always being consciousness bliss, why does God place us in difficulties? Why did He create us? Bhagwan, does God come and tell you that He placed you in difficulties? It is you who say so. It is the false I again. If that disappears, there will be no one to say that God created this or that. That which is does not even say I am, for does any doubt arise that I am not? Only if a doubt arose whether one was a cow or a buffalo, would one have to remind oneself that one is not an animal but a man. But this never happens. It is the same with one's own existence and realization. This last quotation brings us back from what self inquiry is not to what it is. When the mind unceasingly investigates its own nature, it transpires that there is no such thing as the mind. This is the direct path for all. The mind is merely thoughts. Of all thoughts, the thought I is the root. Therefore, the mind is only the thought I. Whence does this thought I arise? Seek for it within it. It then vanishes. This is the pursuit of wisdom. Where the I vanishes, there appears an I by itself. This is the infinite Purnam. If the ego is everything else is also. If the ego is not, nothing else is. Indeed, the ego is all, therefore, the inquiry as to what this ego is the only way of giving up everything. The state of non-emergence of I is the state of being that. Without questioning, without questioning, for that state of non-emergence of I and attaining it, how can one accomplish one's own extinction from which the I does not revive? Without that attainment, how is it possible to abide in one's true state where one is that? Just as a man would dive in order to get something, that had fallen into the water, so one should dive into oneself with a keen, one pointed mind, controlling speech and breath, and find the place whence the I originates. The only inquiry leading to self realization is seeking the source of the word I. Meditation on I am not this, I am that may be an aid to inquiry, but it cannot be the inquiry. If one inquires who am I within the mind, the individual I falls down abashed as soon as one reaches the heart, and immediately reality manifests itself spontaneously as I. Although it reveals itself as I, it is not the ego but the perfect being, the absolute self, Bhagwan. The notion of bondage and liberation are merely modifications of the mind. They have no reality of their own and therefore cannot function of their own accord. Since they are modifications of something else, there must be an entity independent of them as their common source and sport. If therefore, one investigates into that source in order to know of whom the bondage or liberation is predicated. One will find that they are predicated of me, that is oneself. If one then earnestly inquires who am I, one will see that there is no such thing as I or me. That which remains on seeing that the I does not exist is realized vividly and unmistakably as self-luminous and subsisting merely as itself. This vivid realization as a direct and immediate experience of the Supreme Truth comes quite naturally with nothing uncommon about it. To everyone who remaining just as he is, inquiries introspectively without allowing the mind to become externalized even for a moment or wasting time in mere talk. There is therefore not the least doubt regarding the well established conclusion that to those who have attained this realization and thus abide absolutely identical with the self, there is neither bondage nor liberation. Bhagwan. The self is pure consciousness, yet a man identify, identifies himself with the body which is insensate and does not itself say, I am the body. Someone else says so. The unlimited self does not. Who does? A spurious I arises between pure consciousness and the insensate body and imagines itself to be limited to the body. Seek this and it will vanish like a phantom. The phantom is the ego or mind or individuality. All the scriptures are based on the rise of this phantom, whose elimination is their purpose. The present state is mere illusion. Its dissolution is the goal and nothing else. Bhagwan here refers to the ego as the phantom or a spurious I. In the explanation to the two Parsi ladies quoted earlier, he spoke of a false I and a true I. For practical purposes, he did sometimes speaks of giving up the false I in quest of the true, but that should not be taken as implying that there are two selves in a man. What he really meant was simply giving up the false identification of the I as an individual being in order to realize one's true identity as the universal self. He frequently insisted that there are not two I's of which one can seek and know the other. According to the truth of non-duality, to see the self is to be the self, otherwise there would be the duality of a subject and the object and the trinity of seer, sight and seen. Devotee, how is one to realize the self? Bhagwan, whose self? Find out. Devotee, mine, but who am I? Bhagwan, it is you who must find out. Devotee, I don't know. Bhagwan, just think over the question, who is it that says it? I do not know. Who is the I in your statement? What is not known? Devotee, somebody or something in me. Bhagwan, who is that somebody in whom? Devotees, perhaps some power. Bhagwan, find out. Devotee, why was I born? Bhagwan, who has born? The answer is the same to all your questions. Devotee, who am I then? Bhagwan smiling, have you come to examine me? You must say who you are. Devotee, however much I may try, I do not seem to catch the eye. It is not even clearly discernible. Bhagwan, who is it that says that the eye is not discernible? Are there two eyes in you that one is not discernible to the other? Devotee, instead of inquiring who am I, can I put the question to myself, who are you? So that my mind may be fixed on you, whom I consider to be God in the form of a Guru. Perhaps I would come nearer to the goal of my quest by that inquiry than by asking myself, who am I? Bhagwan, whatever form your inquiry may take, you must finally come to the one I, the self. All these distinctions made between I and you, master and disciple, are merely sign of ignorance. The supreme I alone is to think, otherwise is to delude oneself. Therefore, since your aim is to transcend here and now, these superficialities of physical existence through self-inquiry, where is the scope for making the distinctions of you and I, which pertains only to the body? When you turn the mind inward, seeking the source of thought, where is the you and where the I? You should seek and be the self that includes all. Duty, but it is not funny that I should be searching for the I. Doesn't the inquiry who am I turn out in the end to be an empty formula? Or am I to put the question to myself endlessly repeating it like some mantra? Bhagwan, self-inquiry is certainly not an empty formula. It is more than the repetition of any mantra. If the inquiry, who am I, were mental questioning, it would not be of much value. The very purpose of self-inquiry is to focus the entire mind at its source. It is not therefore a case of one eye searching for another eye, much less is self-inquiry an empty formula, for it involves an intense activity of the entire mind to keep it steadily poised in pure self-awareness. Self-inquiry is the one infallible means, the only direct one to realize the unconditioned absolute being that you really are. The following passage shows still more clearly that it is a question of tracing the I thought back to its source, not of the I discovering another. Visitor, I am told that according to your school I must find out the source of my thought. How am I to do it? Bhagwan, I have no school. However, it is true that one should trace the source of all thoughts. Visitor, suppose I have the thought horse and try to trace its source. I find that it is due to memory, and that memory in its turn is due to prior perception of the object horse. But that's all. Bhagwan, who asked you to think about all that? All those are also thoughts. What good will it do you to go on thinking about memory and perception? It will be endless, like the old dispute which came first, the trace or the seed. Ask the tree or the seed. Ask who has this perception and memory. That I, that has the perception and memory, whence does it arise? Find this out, because perception or memory or any other experience only comes to that I. You do not have such experiences during sleep, and yet you say that you existed during sleep and you exist now too. That shows that the I continues while other things come and go. Visitor, I am asked to find out the source of I, and in fact, that is what I want to find out. But how can I? What is the source from which I came? Bhagwan, you came from the same source in which you were during sleep. Only during sleep you could not know where you entered. That is why you must make the inquiry while awake. Some of us advised the visitor to read Who Am I and Ramana Gita, and Bhagwan also told him he might do so. He did so during the day, and in the evening he said to Bhagwan, those books prescribe self-inquiry, but how is one to do it? Bhagwan, that must also be prescribed in the books. Visitor, am I to concentrate on the thought, who am I? Bhagwan, it means that you must concentrate to see where the I thought arises. Instead of looking outwards, look inwards to see where the I thought arises. Visitor, and Bhagwan says that if I see that I shall realize the self. There is no Bhagwan, there is no such thing as realizing the self. How is one to realize or make real? What is real? People all realize or regard as real what is unreal, and all they have to do is to give up doing so. When you do that, you will remain as you always are, and the real will be real. It is only to help people give up regarding the unreal as real, and that all the religions and practices taught by them have come into being. So I end the video here. Thank you for watching this video. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe the channel. Video number 6 will start with the question by visitor. Visitor, whence comes birth? Bhagwan, whose birth? And page number 134. So, namaskar, my dear friend. Thank you.